gap between the old media and the new media and whether it really matters. But there's no point whatever in me having Sir John Curtice on the sofa without asking you right at the beginning, John, what is happening?
Well, we've had 5 polls come out over the weekend. On average, they put the Conservatives 10 points ahead. And in truth, that's where we were at the beginning of the election campaign. So although during the course of the election campaign there has been movement for both Conservative and Labour, both have gained ground, Conservatives at the expense of the Brexit Party, Labour at the expense of Democrats, certainly the implication of this morning's polls is that basically not very much further movement has happened during the course of the last week, which does therefore mean that the Conservatives are certainly in pole position to win, but not necessarily so far ahead that they're guaranteed. We've had a couple of exercises done for pro-Remain organisations trying to come up with seat estimates using clever statistics. 344, 345 seats for the Conservatives, around a 40 majority.
So working majority. Now, what that misses, of course, at the moment, I was saying tactical voting, because there are lots of places in the country where people are looking very, very seriously at how to defeat particularly a Conservative candidate in different ways. Now, we won't know what effect that's going to have until we actually get the results in, presumably.
Well, one of the things about tactical voting you have to understand is that people tend to decide to do it quite late in the day. And therefore, and also it's a relatively small number of people who do it, but they can have a big impact. So it's therefore very difficult to see in the polls in the run-up to an election what the extent to which it's going to take place. And that's bound to remain one of the uncertainties that will be hanging over Central Office during the course of the next 4 days.
Gloria.
John, can I ask you, because it's sort of reverse tactical voting is my question, because what I'm coming across quite a bit on the doorstep is people who are in a bad mood, to put it mildly, with the Labour Party, who say, well, I don't want a Tory, but I'm going to vote for this third party, whether that be Brexit, Independent, what have you. Now, the result will be the same, of course. That will result in a Tory majority. How big a problem do you think the third party, the sort of...
Well, I mean, the only reason why we're talking about tactical voting so much on the Remain side in the first place is that the Remain vote is split between Labour and the Democrats, although it's become more concentrated in Labour's hands during the course of the campaign, whereas on the Leave side, the vote's all basically piled in behind the Conservatives. The Conservatives have 70% of the Leave vote, Labour has slightly less than 50% of the Remain vote, and that essentially are the two statistics you need to know to understand why Boris Johnson is currently heading for victory. So sure, but then so the arguments therefore on the Remain side about having tactical voting is trying to overcome that split by at least trying to get people to vote for whichever party seems better placed to defeat the Tories locally. But whether they will succeed or not...
I mean, whatever happens, I think, in this election, we're still going to end up with a country that's deeply divided. That's not, that won't have healed, and I think that's a deep problem.
Whatever decision we now make about Brexit, whether we go for leaving the European Union on 31st of January or going for a second referendum, will leave this country divided. I think we've run out of road in finding any way of resolving Brexit that's going to actually keep the country together.
Because we refuse to compromise as politicians, and that's a great shame.
But you're also, but in doing that, you're reflecting the view of the public. The public is polarised between the extreme options.
John is very interesting on the polarisation of the nation. You have some...
well, the Sunday Times today, I essentially illustrates...
Let's look at some articles specifically. You've chosen 2 from the Sunday Times that sort of go together.
It really illustrates the way in which Brexit is changing the politics of our country on the ground. So on the one hand, the Sunday Times has been to Trimdon in Tony Blair's former constituency in Sedgefield, and has been talking to traditional Labour voters there, and you get a very clear feeling of the way in which many traditional Labour pro-Leave voters have fallen out of love with the Labour Party, and even drawing a contrast between Tony Blair, who came from Islington, whom they like, and Jeremy Corbyn, who comes from Islington, who they don't like. But to give you a flavour, people either have a problem with the position on Brexit or they have a problem with Corbyn. We are fighting a battle on 2 fronts. It's difficult but not impossible. They don't like Corbyn because they think he's anti-law and order and anti-defence. And then the article then goes on to talk about the row about him not knowing about the timing of the Queen's Christmas message. But then equally, and just literally underneath this, going to much more affluent Britain, Esher, where Dominic Raab you would think should be safe, but the Liberal Democrats are challenging. And here's the Liberal Democrat candidate just showing the contrast in people's views about Brexit. This area has enjoyed the fruits of globalisation, and it sees opportunities being shut down. And this is really the contrast between the two.
Gloria, of course, at this time in the 2017 campaign, most people had not spotted a big move to Labour. It was happening underneath the radar, things were going on, everything was rumbling under our feet. Is the same thing happening here? What does it feel like in Ashfield?
It feels very tough. And actually, when you talk about that sort of big swing to Labour, which emerged last time, don't underestimate, which was the untold story of that election, which was the massive swing to the Tories in traditional Labour areas, seats which are now, which had big majorities then, but are now quite low-hanging fruit, and that makes me really really worried. Yeah. We'll keep fighting. And so this headline about Labour not trying to win is absolutely nonsense. I'll be out there all week from tomorrow. But what this story says is that if Labour is defeated, please goodness this doesn't happen, but if Labour is defeated, then Corbyn would resign on Friday and make way for John McDonnell as caretaker leader, who would then immediately appoint his protégé Rebecca Long-Bailey as Shadow Chancellor. I've no idea whether that is true or not, but I am interested in the next line, which says that the Labour Party would launch a review into Labour's election defeat. And I think, I really hope it doesn't happen, but if that red wall that we talk about, those Labour heartlands, if they fall to the Tories, I think we have to resolve never, ever again will these seats be on the table for the Labour Party. They're not just parliamentary seats, they are the seats of our soul.
They're your history.
They are us. They are heartlands, the place of our heart.
What's the problem in these seats? Is it that Labour is too left-wing, or is it it's too socially liberal? Because, of course, the membership you now have got is undoubtedly both socially liberal and on the left.
All political parties' memberships are way too posh, but this is a particular problem for the Labour Party, the Workers' Party. And what I would do as part of this rebuilding process is I would actually say, if you want to, you can't charge working class people 50 quid to be a party member, free membership for anyone on the minimum wage. That might help us.
But of course, you are no longer a working class party. You're a party of young people, not a party of the working class.
Sarah. Front page of the Mail on Sunday.
So Boris Johnson, hardest working man in journalism. He's literally got a piece in every single newspaper. Mail on Sunday.
And they all think they've got an exclusive. It's rather sweet.
He's obviously rather good at that. This is interesting. But I mean, one of the big themes of this election has been Labour's problem with anti-Semitism and a broader problem with, how it approaches law and order in general and Corbyn's approach to terrorists, which is, giving people a lot of questions. Anyway, Boris is saying, I mean, it's a good gift for a headline writer, isn't it? Friday the 13th.
Do you know what? It's a gift for the Conservative Party. We know at this stage of the campaign that the Mail and the Times and the Telegraph are all going to go for the Labour Party, but in a sense they've made it quite easy this time round, haven't they?
Yes, they really have. And I think that what you were saying earlier about you losing your sort of core base is really important. I mean, people have this election is really, I think, a sort of second act of the last election that we had.
Yes.
And so those trends that we saw are sort of starting to consolidate.
But it does also raise fundamental questions about the future of the Conservative Party, whose electorate now is much more pro-Leave than it was the one that David Cameron had in 2015. Yeah. It therefore makes a party whose electoral base is much less keen on supporting the views of big business, etc. Yeah. It's a big challenge for the Conservatives as well.
There's an interesting twist in this I want to ask Sarah about very quickly, which is if it's true that the Tories win a lot of those red wall seats in the north and fall back a bit in the south, as seems possible, that means the new Conservative government, if that's what happens, has a lot of, as it were, pro-public sector, traditional working class voters, and that will change the Tory party.
And I've said this a lot in my newspaper. I think the two main if the Tories get back, the two things they really need to go hard on are social care and housing. I mean, I've led a social care campaign in the Mail to try and, these are really important issues amongst those new voters.
I mentioned earlier on that the world of the election campaign seems completely different if you're looking at social media and you're looking at online publications. Gloria, you've got, I think, the Huffington Post there.
I have
one example of that.
It's a lovely interview with Angela Rayner, actually, a politician from Planet Normal. She has.
Her way up still.
There's one. She has overcome. She's such an extraordinary life story and what she has overcome. But what I really like about her comments, this particular comment in this interview, is what's her reaction when she hears lifelong Labour voters say they are considering voting Tory, and she says, "I try and understand that, and I understand why people are upset. We do not, as a Labour Party, go around, finger jab, abuse them, we understand where we have fallen short, and I commend Angela
But the thing
for
is,
doing
on social media, if you don't, there are so many Labour supporters on social media who are finger jabby and who are very judgmental of anybody who doesn't share their worldview. And I know there's a perception that Labour does very, very well, or that the momentum, if you like, the younger, does very well on social media. But I think people see those sort of responses and they're quite horrified. You know, some of them are very aggressive and very judgmental.
We do as a society have this now fundamental social division between Remainers and Leavers, and we do tend to think of ourselves as being in them and other camps. And that's the effect on social media.
Just as we come to the end of our time here, can I ask about the campaign itself? Because people are looking back with a slight sense of blurriness about what's actually happened. What have been the moments in this campaign that really counted? We have Boris dying in a ditch right at the beginning and doing his Brexit deal. That's sort of, as it were, Sarah, what do you think's mattered most?
The thing that struck me most, it was listening to Nicola Sturgeon on Woman's Hour saying that she was hoping for a hung parliament because that would be what would give her the greatest leverage in Westminster. And I think that politicians, you know, that is not having the best interests of the country at heart.
Gloria, there were two big Labour announcements that I noticed. One was on free broadband and one was the money for the WASPy women.
Yeah.
Do you think either of those have really cut through?
If I'm honest, I think there has been, because the news machine requires new information every day, and that actually conflicts with landing information in the public's minds. So in this last week, go back to the essentials, and for me those are free NHS prescriptions and free dentistry. They will really help the working poor.
You're right about free dentistry.
John, the other big thing that happened earlier on in the campaign, people may have forgotten by now, the Brexit Party stood down in a lot of seats against the Conservatives. Does that matter?
Oh yeah, but the standing itself in itself not, but the broader message it sent, yes. As we've already explained, the Conservative Party's got 70% of the Leave vote, and it's managed to squeeze the Leave vote during the course of the campaign. And Nigel Farage's decision not to stand in Conservative-held seats and essentially put up a white flag for those who were criticising the character of the deal that Boris Johnson has got, and certainly helped to encourage the flow of voters from Brexit to the Conservative Party, which, if Boris Johnson does win on Thursday, would have been the fundamental movement that would have given the Prime Minister his majority.
Thanks all very much. There are still a few ferocious campaigning days to go. The weather may be